that Real Madrid and Xabi Alonso have parted ways after Real Madrid lost in the Supercopa to Barcelona. Just a reminder of how things have played out. He was appointed at the beginning of the season in the summer for 2025. We saw him come in, and on July 9th, 2025, he loses to PSG because he takes over for the Club World Cup. They lose out in the semi-finals there, 4-0 as well, a quite significant loss. As the season opens, it starts great. 7 straight wins for Real Madrid, and everybody's happy. And
well, not Vini.
Vini.
He was.
He might be a bit happier now. Things got really well, even after they had lost to Atleti, which didn't go down too well. They did win his first Clásico in La Liga. However, as Craig mentioned, we start to see some of those cracks with Vini. He had a tantrum as he was subbed off. November the 1st, 2025, won 13 of their first 14 games. That one that wasn't won was at the Metropolitano. 2 wins in 8 games, November 4th through December 10th. This is when the problems really started to show. We started to see the rumours of talks behind the scenes between the board, with the players as well in the dressing room. 5 straight games, though, as we go over the Christmas period and into the new year. And then came the Spanish Supercopa final. It was to Barcelona, a repeat of last year's final. And Real Madrid would lose 3-2. And then the news came today, this morning, that Xabi Alonso would be leaving Real Madrid by mutual consent. Our Madrid correspondent Alex Kirkland is with us now. Let's get to the bottom of this as to why this has been the case, the reasons behind Xabi Alonso's early departure as Real Madrid head coach, Alex.
Yeah, the big question is why now? Because we knew that Xabi was under huge pressure. He had been for months. We knew there were doubts right at the top of the club, really, about him and had been for some time. But the feeling was, and pretty much literally everyone thought so, that they came out of the Supercopa having done enough to keep Xabi in his job. Yes, they lost the final to Barcelona, but they had managed to compete. They lost 3-2. It wasn't a repeat of the 5-2 loss in the Supercopa final last season, for example. So yeah, why now? I think there are a number of factors. One of them is that I think that the way they played in that game against Barcelona yesterday didn't go down too well. There was a feeling they were sort of overly defensive and conservative. This is not kind of a way that Real Madrid should play in a final, even if it was to a limited extent successful. They lost the game, of course, in the end. There were flashpoints, sort of disagreements behind the scenes on certain issues, especially about the number of injuries, the fitness, the physical preparation of the team. There've been some manoeuvrings there. Antonio Pintus, the physical coach who'd been sort of sidelined under Xabi Alonso, having previously been a big part of Real Madrid's success, and being brought back in, and Xabi Alonso had been opposed to that. Also, the feeling, I think, that things weren't getting better. The team weren't improving. Even those sort of winning runs you mentioned there, they weren't particularly convincing. They weren't playing consistently well. They didn't seem to be really an idea of, okay, this is the way forward. And in fact, Xabi Alonso, the way that he'd come in with his ideas in the summer, the way that he wanted teams to play, we were seeing kind of less of that and not more. And the other thing I think about why it happens now is that there's still so much at stake. You know, there's half the season left. The team are still in the title race in La Liga. They're still in the Copa del Rey. They play in the Cup this week. They're still in the Champions League. Yes, they've lost the Supercopa, the least important of the trophies up for grabs this season. So I think it's a combination of all of those factors that means it happens now. But still, yeah, the timing does come as a big surprise. Because like I say, you know, earlier on today, no one was expecting us to have this conversation right now.
I think I know the answer to this, Alex. But has any of... have any of the players raised their head above the parapet and said, sorry to see what's happened to you, boss, or is it the fireworks?
Yeah, it's the classic thing when you're basically on alert watching social media, isn't it? See which of the players are going to post statements, you know, saying goodbye, thanks, boss, all the best for the future, and which of them are going to be conspicuously silent. I think Mbappe was the first one to post on Instagram, sort of paying tribute to Xabi Alonso. And after him, last time I checked, most of the other squad had followed. 1 or 2 hadn't. Now, this may have changed, but last time I looked, I hadn't seen something from Vinicius Jr. I hadn't seen something from Jude Bellingham. Of course, 2 of the biggest names and 2 of the players that in different ways we understand have had 1 or 2 issues with the coach. So, yeah, it's always quite interesting, like I say, having a look at those messages, sort of reading them, taking them at face value and trying to kind of read between the lines as well.
Everybody was expecting a big change in the way that the team had gone about things, and albeit it had been successful, but it certainly felt stale in the last year under Ancelotti, and certainly devoid of any answers to the form of some of the players and the shape. And we all felt that Alonso was going to come in and it was going to be fresh and it was going to be different. and it was going to be vibrant and dynamic. And it was the opposite. And I think it was the opposite, not because he didn't want that, but I think it was the opposite because he got a group of players, and maybe I'm not painting them all with this brush, but it certainly looks like a lot of them. I've almost, whilst not maybe verbally have said anything, but are thinking to themselves, this is how we do things at Real Madrid. This is what's worked for us. And we're not taking on board what you want. And I think we saw during the season, Alonso almost evolved back into the old ways of doing stuff because that's the only way that he felt, it seemed to me anyway, that he could get results with these players because he tried to get them to do things his way, pressing and running and all this different stuff. And it clearly was, he was facing some backlash, certainly if you looked at performances. And so he'd gone back to sort of Ancelotti, sort of this, not so much possession, try and keep a shape. And we saw a bit of that, particularly in this Supercopa, where they, I think in the first half it was something like 20% possession or just above. I mean, as Stevie said earlier, it was like playing a cup against a relegation side, the way Real Madrid approached it. So I think he had all those issues to deal with, plus the egos, plus who's, I'm not playing, why am I not playing? Vini's management getting involved. And I think he's just gone in there, Alonso, and thought, do you know what? Good luck to whoever wants to come in and try and take over this lot, because it is an ego-maniac kind of place. The one guy that's really stepped up, in all fairness, probably the biggest ego of the lot, but Kylian Mbappe can look at himself in the mirror and say, I scored goals for Ancelotti, and I've done my utmost for Xabi Alonso, including that Copa del Rey game against that team that I can never remember their name.
Yeah, Talavera.
Talavera, where Andre Lunin makes a save to stop the game going to extra time. Xabi Alonso, a save that probably got Xabi Alonso to the Supercopa. So, yeah, when you just looked at the performances, Celta Vigo at home, Sevilla at home, even though they won, Sevilla were 10 men, Elche away, there was the Athletic Club game was good, the Betis game at home was pretty good recently, but you could, in 6 months of a season, you could go on one hand and not fill every finger, counting good performances. Mm-hmm. But bad performances, even though results came, bad performances, they were 10 a penny. There was lots of them.
It's very difficult not to agree with what you're talking about with the players. You don't, as a coach, you don't go from doing what you did at Leverkusen, where you could see what they were doing, how they were set up, what they were trying to do, how they went about it.
Even the subs felt important, they were happy with their roles.
You can't go from that to Real Madrid and then be told that you're a bad coach. You got to think it's what Craig's talking about, where, and it doesn't take many, it takes 2 or 3 to not want to do what they're supposed to be doing, and the whole thing just becomes so unbalanced. And it has to be that, because as I said, a guy who coached a team so well doesn't all of a sudden become a bad coach. Sure, he maybe made some wrong decisions with some substitutions or not starting the right players. And we can always have a go at Vini, because he obviously makes it clear whether he's happy or whether he's unhappy. But it has to be more than just one guy. And there has to be too many who either don't get it or, probably more likely, just don't want to do it.
I'm glad Alex said that.
Mbappe put out the post.
Yeah, but I'm glad Alex, thus far as we go to air, I'm glad that Alex has said that Vinicius Jr. thus far hasn't made any statements, because I think that would be extremely hypocritical. Because I don't think it's a secret that there was a confrontation. Those two, it was apples and oranges, wasn't it? He didn't like his lack of minutes. He didn't like he was been subbed off. He didn't like he had been dropped. So in a sense, as a player, there's nothing wrong with There's nothing wrong with the fact if you didn't get on with somebody. Yeah. So I'm quite glad at the moment that we're not seeing this sort of two faces coming out and saying, I'm sorry to see you go, boss, and all that sort of stuff.
How much, Alex, did the relationship between Vini Jr. and Xabi Alonso have to do with his departure?
I think it's significant because he's one of the biggest names, he's one of the star players, and it was so obvious and evident that things weren't right there. We all saw it in literally the biggest game of the season, in the Clásico, and what should have been kind of a turning point for the positive for Xabi Alonso was beating Barcelona in the Clasico, something they'd failed to do the previous season. They won that game at the Bernabeu, and just as that's happening, when this should be sort of the big moment, it was completely transformed by Vini's reaction to being subbed off early and making it so public. I'm not saying there was no way back from that, but I think it was such a crucial moment in all of this, because it was sort of laid bare for all to see. And that was always going to be extremely difficult to recover from, both from Xabi Alonso in terms of kind of his image and his authority as the coach, when one of the players is reacting to his decisions in that way so publicly, and also sort of rebuilding that relationship. It's in some little signs of maybe rebuilding there. How much of it is for show, you don't know, in terms of a hug from Vini for the coach when he came off a couple of times and things like that. But I think that was still a really pivotal moment in all of this. But it wasn't just him. There are a number of players. Some of the players, we understand, supported Xabi, supported his ideas and what he wanted to do. But to go back to an earlier point, the big question is, could this squad, this team, this group of players play the kind of football that Xabi Alonso wants them to play, or would they? And the answer is no. And it's not us saying that. That's what Xabi Alonso discovered, because clearly all of those ideas were dropped as the season went on, and it felt kind of improvisational, sort of going game by game and trying to work out a way to kind of muddle through almost. But all of that kind of big game plan for what this team were going to be as the seasons developed has just fallen by the wayside. And I think Vini was one important part of that. Yeah, there were some whistles in the last couple of home games over decisions, over passages of play. But there's also, I think it's disappointment and a bit of sadness, because don't forget, Xabi Alonso is a Real Madrid legend, was a really important player in Real Madrid's history. He was here for a number of seasons, won trophies. Everybody loved him as a player. He was a brilliant signing when he came in. And so I think there's sadness that a guy who the fans loved hasn't been able to make it work. Sadness and disappointment, but also, there's not a lot of patience here. And so when the team weren't performing consistently week after week, the fans were never going to be shy about making that known. I think in terms of viewing this decision, I think there's kind of a spectrum of opinions. I think some people will support it. Some people think it's come too soon. Some people think, there's been a hurry to make the decision. They should have given a new project more time. His replacement, who we haven't touched on yet, Alvaro Arbeloa, is massively popular with Real Madrid fans. They love Arbeloa. They love what he represents. They think he sort of stands up for the club and its interests, and has done so ever since his days as a player in the Mourinho team era. So they love Arbeloa. That is absolutely clear.
Yeah, and a player alongside Xabi Alonso, who he's friends with, and now it is Alvaro Arbeloa who's taking over. And as Alex mentioned, 7 seasons as a first-team player at Real Madrid, winning 8 trophies, including 2 Champions League titles and 1 La Liga trophy. He's been working in the ranks. He took over Real Madrid Castilla, which is the second team, in May. They're currently 4th place in the 3rd tier, and he's served as a coach throughout the ranks as well at various levels of the youth system since. So what are the expectations here? And what specifically is this role, Alex, that we're looking at? Is it an interim until they find somebody else right now, or will he take over till the end of the season? What are we hearing?
Well, looking at the club statement, there is the word interim does not appear. He has been named as the new Real Madrid coach. And so he's the coach. We don't have details yet of that contract, but he is Real Madrid's new coach. And let's see how long that lasts. It's going to be fascinating. He has no experience, of course, of coaching at the highest level. As you say, he's been at the academy for the last 5 or 6 years, coaching Castilla, winning trophies with the youth teams. But that's a very different ball game to coaching at senior level. Everybody talks about what a kind of strong personality he is, how clear he is in his ideas of how he wants things to be done and how he wants to play, how outspoken he is. He was outspoken as a player. He has been as a coach as well. I'm told by colleagues who've been in a lot of his press conferences with Castilla to buckle up, basically, because some of those presses are going to be pretty explosive, I think, with Arbeloa, because he is not shy at all about giving his opinion and saying exactly what he thinks about whatever issue he's talking about. But we just don't know, in terms of how successful he's going to be. There are recent examples of coaches stepping up from Castilla and having great success. The big one, of course, is Zidane. Zidane was Castilla coach, had no experience really beyond that, came in midway through the season, just like Arbeloa does now, and the rest is history. Winning 3 Champions Leagues in a row and everything else. Not everyone is going to be Zidane. That was a very, very special thing. But like I said, there are some precedents which are encouraging.
Yeah, because that's a different matter, obviously, with all respect to Alvaro Arbeloa and what he means for the club. Those players, Zinedine Zidane walks in, everything he achieved, who he was as a player, it's a different story to Alvaro Arbeloa walking in.
I think I think it matters. I don't suppose it matters to the outside, but I think to Arbeloa it matters where he stands. Because if you're the interim or the manager, there are two different, you go about it two different ways. If you're the interim, then you're just going to keep everybody happy and keep it ticking along and just keep the shit moving. Whereas if you actually given the job, then you've got a decision to make. Do I do it my way? Or do I just keep everybody happy and hope it goes the right way? And apparently Arbeloa is a guy who speaks his mind. So if that's the case, and they don't start well, are we going to have the same nonsense with Vini and some of the other guys? So it does depend on what Arbeloa's role is. If he's the interim, then you know what? You go in there and you keep everybody happy and you just make sure they have a good shape and then let them play. But if you actually get the job, or if you think this could be my job, you've got to go about it a different way.
No, as Alex said, there was no mention of it in the press release. I've been interim, so it looks like he's taken the role on. I don't know if this is a scenario, but I think it'll be a lot easier for him. Not easy, but a lot easier if he knows if it goes wrong, he can step back into that role that he's been in, coaching the kids and then coaching the Castilla in the lower leagues. If he knows he can and has some sort of, some sort of agreement with Florentino Perez that if this doesn't work out, I can step back down, then he can go in and be a little ballsy about it. He can go in and be stronger because he knows he's got some sort of parachute. If he hasn't got that, is he in the firing line? Because, this club just chews people up and spits them out, and this group of players have done that. I go back to it, and I make no apologies. When one of the most respected coaches on the planet, certainly in our lifetime, is having to beg a superstar to run or tell him you're coming off, then that tells you that how difficult it is to gain respect in that dressing room. So, as good as he's been and as opinionated as he is, at the end of the day, you're asking sort of lepers to change their spots. And that's going to be a really interesting watch. The other thing is intrigued to see what team selection is going to be, how he varies from Xabi Alonso, how they play, if there's any difference in their play, because that's what we've all been looking for from the transition from Carlo Ancelotti to Xabi Alonso. Right, what's going to be the difference? That's what we were waiting on. Because you look at Hansi Flick, Xavi did a good job and then it all went wrong, but you look at Hansi Flick, he came in and there was just a huge contrast in the way they went about it. And we were all sitting thinking, right, this is going to be great. Xabi Alonso's going to come in and we're going to see a super fresh Real Madrid just doing things differently. And it just was not the case. And, good luck to Arbeloa because he's the latest incumbent. But, they've got good enough players to put a title challenge in. Whether they have the mindset to do that or not remains to be seen.
Yeah, and the production team are telling me in my ear, Alex, before we let you go, that as of 5:14 Eastern on Monday, there has been no update so far from Vini Jr or Jude Bellingham.
I wasn't quite aware of the Jude Bellingham scenario, Alex. What's the alleged scenario there with him, the manager, ex-manager?
Well, look, that's been much less public, and I should say that's something that Jude Bellingham himself, when he's spoken about it recently in a press conference, has denied. He denied any suggestions of dressing room unrest or anything like that. But there have been multiple reports from different sources that there've been, in terms of Bellingham's role in the team, how he plays, how the coach wanted him to play, that they haven't always entirely seen eye to eye on that kind of thing. So maybe less about personalities and more about kind of tactics and the role and how to get the best out of him.
Yeah, okay, great stuff. Thanks so much, Alex. We'll know you've got your finger on the pulse when it comes to this story, and we'll no doubt be speaking to you across the coming days about this situation. Make sure to stay up to date with everything that's going on over on our YouTube channel. We did react to the news as it came out earlier today with Sid Lowe, and that is already available over on the ESPN FC YouTube channel.